She came with luggage and a list. I remember the exact moment I understood that my life had changed in a way I hadn't agreed to. It was a Friday afternoon in late October, the kind of day where the Georgia light comes in golden and low through the kitchen windows, and the whole house smells like the candles I'd lit after work, cedar and clove, the ones my mother used to love. I had a glass of wine open on the counter. I was making pasta. I was, for the first time all week, genuinely relaxed. Then I heard the front door open, and Marcus's voice, bright and boyish, in a way he only ever got when he was nervous and covering it, saying, "Sienna, babe, just leave the bags by the stairs for now." Plural. Bags. Plural. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the hallway. And there she was. Sienna Caldwell, 24 years old, Marcus's daughter from his first marriage, standing in the entryway of my house with 2 rolling suitcases, a duffel bag over one shoulder, and an expression on her face that I can only describe as someone who had already mentally redecorated the space. She looked at me and smiled, not warmly exactly, more like someone acknowledging a piece of furniture that was in a mildly inconvenient location. "Hey," she said, "it smells really good in here." "Thank you," I said, because I am, at my core, a person who defaults to politeness even when every instinct is firing warning signals. I looked at Marcus. "What's going on?" He put his hand on the back of his neck. His tell, the gesture he makes when he knows he's done something he should have asked about first, and said, "I meant to tell you earlier, Sienna's going to stay with us for a little while, just until she gets back on her feet." I want to pause here and tell you something about Marcus, because it matters for everything that comes after. Marcus is, in most ways, a genuinely good man. He is kind to strangers, he remembers birthdays. He once drove 40 minutes in the rain to bring soup to a colleague he barely knew who had the flu. He is the sort of man who inspires confidence, the sort of man you believe when he says everything is going to be fine. He is also a man who has been carrying a suitcase full of guilt for 15 years, ever since he and Sienna's mother divorced when Sienna was 9 years old, and he moved out of the house in Savannah where Sienna grew up and rebuilt his life in Atlanta while Sienna stayed with her mother and visited him every other holiday. He's never said it outright, but I've seen it in the way he over-explains his decisions when Sienna is involved, in the way his voice goes careful and deliberate whenever she calls, in the way he always lands on yes before he's finished processing the question. He loves his daughter, and that love has a shape that is very difficult to argue with, because arguing with it means, in his mind, arguing with the 15 years of absence he's trying to make right. I understood all of this in the hallway. I understood it, and I said, "Can we talk in the kitchen for a second?" "Of course," Marcus said. He turned to Sienna. "Just make yourself at home, okay?" She was already heading toward the living room. In the kitchen, I kept my voice low and even. "Marcus, you didn't ask me." "I know. I'm sorry. The timing was..." "Sienna called me this morning. She's been staying at a friend's place since the split with Devon, and it's not working out, and I told her yes before I thought it through. But it's just temporary. A few weeks, maybe a month." "This is my house." He looked at me steadily. "It's our home, Nora." I let that sit there for a moment. I didn't correct him, not then. I wasn't ready to have that conversation, and part of me, the part that still wanted this marriage to be uncomplicated, thought maybe it would be fine. A few weeks, a month. I could do that. I went back to the pasta. What I didn't know then, what I would understand slowly, incrementally, the way you understand a rising tide before you understand you're drowning, was that a few weeks was not a concept Sienna Caldwell was operating with. She took the guest room, which was fine. It's a good room. Faces the backyard, has its own bathroom, gets morning light. I'd put care into that room. A reading chair by the window, good sheets, a lamp I'd found at an estate sale in Decatur that I loved unreasonably. Sienna moved her things in that first night, and by the next morning, she had rearranged the furniture. I discovered this when I walked past the open door on my way to make coffee. The reading chair had been pushed into the corner. The lamp was on the floor, unplugged. I picked up the lamp and set it on the dresser. Sienna came up behind me. Oh, I needed the outlet for my ring light. I'm trying to get my content creation thing off the ground, so I need the setup to be right. That's fine, I said. I just want to make sure the lamp doesn't get damaged on the floor. She looked at the lamp, then at me, and said nothing. Downstairs, she watched me make coffee. I use a pour-over. I've used a pour-over for 11 years. It's a ritual I genuinely love. And after about 30 seconds, she said, "Huh, that takes a long time." "It does," I agreed. "Dad just uses the Keurig." "I know, I got him the Keurig." "So why don't you use it?" I handed her a mug. "Because I like this better." She took a sip, made a face so small I might have imagined it, and said, "It's a little bitter." And that was the first morning. By Sunday, she had a preferred spot on the living room couch, the left cushion nearest the window, with her legs stretched across the middle cushion in a way that made it difficult for anyone else to sit down without asking her to move. She was on her phone constantly, or on her laptop, or watching something on the TV at a volume that made conversation in the adjoining dining room difficult. Marcus orbited her happily. He brought her snacks without being asked. He laughed at things she said that I didn't hear. He looked, and I say this without bitterness, only accuracy, relieved. Like a man who had been holding his breath for 15 years and had finally been allowed to exhale. I washed dishes and watched them from the kitchen and told myself this was temporary. On Monday evening, I asked Sienna, as gently as I could, because I am a person who believes in directness paired with kindness, how long she was thinking of staying. She looked up from her phone. "I don't know, a few months maybe? I need to figure out my living situation." "A few months," I repeated. "Dad said it was fine." She went back to her phone. Those 4 words landed in the room so easily, so automatically, like she'd said them 1,000 times before. And I realized, standing there with a dish towel in my hands, that she probably had. That Dad said it was fine was a complete sentence in Sienna's vocabulary. A sentence that ended discussions. A sentence that had never, in her experience, been wrong. I called my best friend Dana that night from the bedroom, door closed, voice low. "She said a few months," I told Dana. "A few months," Dana repeated. "In your house." "In my house." I paused. "The house Dad left me. The one I bought out from the estate before I met Marcus." "Girl," Dana said. "I know." "Does Marcus know whose house it technically—" "He knows the history," I said. "I don't think he's thinking about it right now." Dana was quiet for a moment. "You need to be thinking about it, Nora." I told her she was probably right. I told her I'd give it a few weeks, see how it went, try to stay patient. I told her all the things I told myself in those early days when I still believed patience was the correct strategy. I should have listened to Dana. That first week established a rhythm I hadn't consented to and couldn't quite figure out how to break without feeling like the villain. Sienna woke late, usually after 10, and came downstairs to find whatever was left of the coffee I'd made hours earlier. If I was still home, she'd comment on it. Too strong, too cold. Why didn't I just use the Keurig? If I'd already left for work, she'd apparently make her own, because I'd come home to unwashed mugs in the sink and the Keurig left on. A habit that made the small, careful part of me that worries about electrical fires quietly miserable. She ate what was in the refrigerator with the confidence of someone who had contributed to stocking it. She hadn't. Marcus did the grocery shopping in our house, has since we got married. But in the first week of Sienna's arrival, she accompanied him twice and came home with things that only she would eat. A specific brand of oat milk that I don't buy, a jar of almond butter that cost $14, 2 bottles of a sparkling water brand I'd never seen. These appeared in the refrigerator alongside our things, and were never offered to anyone, and vanished within days. I didn't say anything about the groceries. They were small things. I am a person who knows the difference between a battle and a war, and I was committed in those first days to fighting neither. What I noticed was subtler than the groceries, or the coffee, or the lamp on the floor. It was the way Sienna talked about the house. She said, "the living room," with the same familiarity that I used. She said, "the guest bathroom," and corrected herself to "my bathroom," without any self-consciousness. One afternoon, I overheard her on a phone call, voice bright and easy. "Yeah, I'm just at home. You should come over sometime." At home. Not at my dad's place. Not at my dad and Nora's. At home. I stood in the hallway outside the kitchen and breathed carefully and went back to what I was doing. Friday of the first week, Marcus and I had dinner alone for the first time since Sienna arrived. She'd gone out with friends, or said she had, and I tried to have the real conversation. "I need you to set an end date with her," I said. Not a vague, a few months, a specific date. Marcus put down his fork. "She's going through a divorce, Nora. Devin really did a number on her financially. I understand that, and I have sympathy for her, I do. But this is my home, and I need to know how long we're talking about." "Our home," he said, gently, not correcting, just the way he always said it, like it was simply the accurate word. I looked at him across the table. "Marcus, I bought this house 6 years before we met. My father's name was on the deed before mine. I paid out the estate. I carried this mortgage alone for 4 years. And now we live here together," he said. "It's our home. That's not a criticism of anything, it's where we live, together." I could see very clearly that we were not having the same conversation. "Will you talk to her?" I asked. "About a timeline?" "I'll talk to her," he said. I don't know if he ever did. If he did, whatever he said didn't change anything I could observe. The second week, Sienna found the good olive oil. Getting comfortable. By the end of the first month, I had developed a taxonomy of the small violations. There were the kitchen ones, Sienna using the good olive oil, the Sicilian one I ordered online, $22 a bottle, to make what she called just toast. Sienna leaving the burner on after heating soup. Sienna reorganizing the spice cabinet because she couldn't find anything, and in doing so, putting the spices I use daily at the back and the ones she'd contributed, paprika, garlic powder, nothing I'd been without, at the front. When I moved them back, they migrated forward again within a week. I stopped moving them after the third time. There were the living room ones, the couch cushion, the television volume, the habit she developed of leaving her laptop charger plugged into the outlet nearest the couch so that its cord crossed the main walking path, a small but reliable annoyance that I stepped over 15 times a day. There was the throw blanket she adopted, a soft gray blanket my sister had given me as a housewarming gift when I first moved in, which migrated from the basket by the fireplace to a permanent position on her half of the couch, sometimes balled under her feet. And there were the larger ones. Those were the ones that mattered. The first large one was the car. I have a car, a 4-year-old Volvo that I've maintained carefully and that I take to the same mechanic I've used since before I was married. Sienna's car, a lease that apparently Devin had been making payments on, had been repossessed in the weeks before she moved in. This came out in fragments, the way unpleasant truths tended to come out when Sienna was the one delivering them. A comment here, a half-sentence there. Never a direct statement. By the time I understood the full picture, Sienna had already asked Marcus if she could borrow my car for just a quick errand, and Marcus had apparently said yes. I came home from work on a Tuesday to find my car gone and a note on the counter. Sienna's handwriting, loopy and large, that said, "Borrowed the Volvo, back by 7. Dad said it was fine." She was back at 8:15. "The errand took longer than expected," she said, setting my keys on the counter without looking at me. I picked up the keys. There was a Starbucks cup in the cup holder when I checked the next morning, and the seat had been moved back to accommodate legs longer than mine. Small things. The kind of thing a person would feel petty for mentioning. I mentioned it to Marcus that night. "She needed to run some errands," he said. "Her situation with the car is complicated." The car situation is complicated, I agreed. My car is not part of that complication. I didn't agree to lend it. She asked me. "She asked you," I said. "But it's my car, Marcus. Like the house. There's a pattern here I need you to see." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want me to say to her?" "I want you to say that she needs to ask me directly, not you, me, for things that are mine." He said he would. The following Thursday, Sienna came to me directly and asked if she could borrow the car. I said yes because it was easier to say yes than to explain why the repeated borrowing was an accumulation of something I didn't have the right words for yet. I said yes, and she took the car, and she brought it back on time, and the whole thing felt like a partial victory that I was somehow losing. The dinner parties were a different category of problem. Sienna began inviting friends over within the second month. Not asking, informing. She'd appear in the kitchen in the afternoon while I was home on a weekend and say, casually, "Hey, a few people are coming over tonight, is that cool?" And the "is that cool" was rhetorical. The way it is when someone is putting on their shoes while they ask if you mind if they go for a walk. The decision was already made. The question was a formality. The first time, I said sure. The second time, I said sure, with slightly less conviction. By the fourth time, the people coming over had expanded from a few to what I counted as 11 people. 11 people I had never met in my living room until after midnight, with a level of alcohol consumption that left 3 empty wine bottles on my kitchen counter, one of which I was fairly certain had been taken from my rack rather than brought by a guest. After they left, I stood in my own living room in my pajamas and looked at the glasses on the coffee table and the throw blanket, my sister's housewarming gift, crumpled on the floor, and I felt something shift. Not anger exactly, something colder and more useful than anger. A kind of clarity. The night that crystallized everything happened on a Wednesday in December, about 6 weeks after Sienna had moved in. She had mentioned 3 days before that a friend might be visiting from out of town, and could she set up the pull-out couch in the study for him? I had said I'd need to think about it, which was my way of saying I was uncomfortable without having to explain the full architecture of my discomfort. Marcus, apparently hearing this as a softer no, had told Sienna, I learned this later, "Just give it a day, she'll come around. About her own house, about her own study, the room where I kept my books and my desk, and the framed photograph of my father and me at the cabin in the North Georgia mountains where we used to go every August until he got sick. I didn't come around because no one actually asked me again. On Wednesday evening, I came downstairs to give a glass of water and found a young man I'd never seen asleep on my couch. Not the study pullout, the actual living room couch. Shoes off, jacket folded over the armrest, like he'd been there long enough to get comfortable. Sienna was curled in the chair across from him, on her phone. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway. "Oh, hey, that's Brett. He ended up getting here later than we thought, and the study thing seemed complicated, so—" "Sienna," I said. My voice was very quiet. "You brought someone to sleep in my home without telling me." "Dad said—" "Sienna?" I stopped her there. "I don't want to have this conversation in front of your friend, but tomorrow morning, you and I are going to talk." Brett had woken up by now, blinking apologetically at me. I told him I was sorry to disturb him and went back upstairs and lay in the dark next to my sleeping husband and stared at the ceiling. The next morning, I was in the kitchen when I heard Sienna tell Brett, her voice carrying easily down the hallway, "Don't worry about her. This isn't even really her house. She just married into it." She just married into it. I set down my coffee cup. I am not a person who cries easily, but I will tell you that in that moment, I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as grief. Not for the marriage, not yet, but for the version of my home that had existed in my mind. For the kitchen where my father used to sit and drink his coffee and read his newspaper while I made breakfast. For the backyard where I'd planted a dogwood tree the spring after he died because he'd always said dogwoods were his favorite. For the 11 years of a life I'd built in this particular set of walls, a life that predated Marcus, that predated Sienna, that belonged to me in a way I had apparently not been sufficiently clear about. I went upstairs. I got my phone. I scrolled to the contact I hadn't called in almost 2 years. Patricia Osei, the real estate attorney who had handled my father's estate and the subsequent title transfer when I bought the house from his other heirs. I called her at 9:04 in the morning. She picked up on the third ring. "Patricia," I said, "I need to know exactly what my position is." Patricia was exactly as I remembered her. Direct, thorough, the kind of person who answered a question by first making sure she understood the exact shape of the question. I explained the situation in the clinical terms that felt most manageable. Stepdaughter, moved in without my consent, husband invited her, property in my name alone, purchased prior to marriage. The title hasn't changed since the transfer? She asked. No, I've never added Marcus to the deed. A pause on her end. Not surprised, just precise. And you're in Georgia? Yes. Georgia is a separate property state, she said. That means property you owned before marriage and property you inherited, which this partially is, since it came through your father's estate, remains yours unless you've taken active steps to commingle it. Added a spouse to the title, refinanced jointly, used marital funds for mortgage payments in a way that would create an equitable interest. She paused again. Have you done any of those things? I thought about it carefully. No, the mortgage was paid off before Marcus and I got married. I've maintained the property taxes and insurance from my personal account, the one I had before we married. Then legally, Patricia said, that house is yours. Your husband has no ownership interest. I sat down on the edge of the bed. And if someone is living there without your consent? Then you have the right to remove them, she said simply. If you've extended a verbal invitation, even informally, you may need to issue a formal notice to vacate first. The standard in Georgia is 60 days for someone who's been in residence more than 30 days, though that depends on the specific circumstances. I'd need to look at the details. Can you do that? I asked. Look at the details? That's what I'm here for, Patricia said. Come in next week. Bring the deed, any mortgage documents, and if you have anything in writing from your husband about the invitation, texts, emails, bring those too. I thanked her and hung up and sat very still for a long moment. What I felt was not triumph. I want to be clear about that. I felt something closer to the feeling you get when a doctor tells you the thing you were afraid of is real. It's not good news, exactly, but it is information. And information, at least, you can work with. I thought about Marcus sleeping peacefully in the next room. I thought about the way he said, our home, without hesitation, with complete sincerity. Because in his mind, that's what it was. A home they shared. A home that was both of theirs. Because they were married, and married people shared things. He had never asked, in 3 years of marriage, to be added to the deed. I had never offered. We had lived in a comfortable ambiguity that had served us well, until a 24-year-old with 2 rolling suitcases walked through the front door and said, "This isn't even really her house." I went back downstairs, made my coffee, sat at the kitchen table and drank it slowly, the way I like. When Sienna came down at 10:30 and said good morning, I said good morning back. When she made a comment about the coffee being kind of intense, I smiled and said I liked it that way. I had made an appointment with Patricia for the following Tuesday. I had begun, in the quiet of my own mind, to build something. I just needed time to build it carefully. The quiet work. The thing about collecting evidence is that it teaches you to pay attention in a different way. Before I called Patricia, I experienced Sienna's presence in my home the way you experience a headache, diffusely, unpleasantly, without being entirely sure which part of your head to press. After I called Patricia, I experienced it with the focused attention of someone who understands that what they're observing matters. Each incident stopped being an annoyance and became a data point. Each phrase, each borrowed item, each unauthorized guest became something I wrote down in the Notes app on my phone, time-stamped and specific. Tuesday, December 4th. Sienna invited Brett to stay a second night without asking. Marcus not home. Thursday, December 6th. Sienna moved the dining room chair I used to the other side of the table because she liked the view better from that side. When I moved it back, she asked why I was being weird about a chair. Saturday, December 8th. Sienna borrowed the Volvo again, this time without asking me, going directly to Marcus. Came home 2 hours late, no explanation offered. The notes were small things, individually. Together, they were a portrait. I met with Patricia on Tuesday the 11th. She had pulled the title records before I arrived. She is that kind of thorough. And she laid them out on her desk with the clean efficiency of someone presenting information that requires no editorializing. The property at 4412 Sycamore Ridge Drive is held in the name of Eleanor Nora Whitfield, she said. That's you. Your birth name, not your married name. Which is also correct since you never legally changed your name on the deed after marriage. I kept my name professionally, I said. I never thought about the deed. Which is fine, Patricia said. And also, in this situation, useful. The property was transferred to you from the estate of Robert James Whitfield, your father, in March of 2014. You purchased the remaining interest from your brother and your father's partner at that time, using funds from your personal savings account, pre-marriage. The mortgage you subsequently took out was in your name alone. You paid it off, also in your name alone, in 2019, a year before you married Marcus Caldwell. She looked at me over her glasses. This house has never, at any point, had any legal connection to Marcus Caldwell. I had known this. I had known it intellectually, the way you know facts you've lived through but rarely need to articulate. Hearing it stated that flatly, that formally, by a person in a suit across a mahogany desk, it landed differently. What does that mean for Sienna? It means she's a guest, Patricia said. Or, given the circumstances, a licensee in legal terms. Someone whose permission to be on the property was granted informally, possibly verbally, by someone who had no authority to grant it. Marcus, she confirmed. His invitation has no legal weight. You are the sole owner. You are the one with the authority to allow or terminate someone's residence in that property. She folded her hands on the desk. Would you like me to draft a formal notice? Not yet, I said. I want to understand my options first. She walked me through them. The formal notice to vacate, the timeline, the process, what it would look like if Sienna refused to leave, what Marcus's reaction might mean legally, if anything, what my exposure was if I simply asked them both to leave and neither one did. That last scenario, I didn't let myself think about for too long. I drove home with a copy of the title documents in my bag and a letter from Patricia outlining my legal position. Not a notice yet, just a formal summary for my own records. I put them in the fireproof box in the back of my closet, the one where I keep my passport and my father's death certificate and the original deed transfer documents from 2014. The box had always been mine, like the house. That week, I found the messages. We had a shared family calendar, Marcus's idea when we first got married, a way of coordinating schedules, nothing more significant than that. We used a shared Apple 1D for it, which meant the iMessage account associated with it occasionally showed notifications on the shared iPad we kept in the kitchen for recipes and grocery lists. I was looking for a grocery list I'd typed in on Thursday when the screen lit up with a notification from Marcus's message thread with Sienna, timestamped from 2 months prior, before she'd moved in. I wasn't snooping. The notification appeared on its own, and the message was visible in the preview without unlocking anything. It said, "The house is big enough, just move in. She'll adjust." She'll adjust. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment looking at that sentence. Not, "I'll talk to Nora." Not, "We'd love to have you, let me ask." Not even, "It might take some time, but we can make it work." She'll adjust. I was not a person to be consulted. I was a condition to be managed. I took a screenshot with my phone. I sent it to my email. I went and sat in my car in the garage for 15 minutes, not crying, just breathing, just letting the full architecture of what had been happening settle into its correct shape. When I came back inside, I started dinner. I didn't mention the message to Marcus. I smiled when he came home and asked about my day. I said fine, and it was busy, and asked about his. I was not going to have this conversation in fragments, in the hallway, in the in-between spaces where it would get smoothed over and deferred and buried under another round of, "She's going through a hard time," and "just a little longer." I was going to have it completely, with documentation, in a setting where there was nowhere to look except at the truth. What I noticed in those weeks of quiet preparation was that Sienna had begun to sense something. Not the specifics, she couldn't have known about Patricia or the documents or the screenshot, but she had the social intuition of someone who had spent a childhood reading the temperature of rooms, learning to detect when the adults around her were managing something. Because children of divorced parents often develop that skill early and carry it long past the age when they need it. She was slightly more careful. The coffee comments stopped. She started rinsing her dishes occasionally. She asked once if I wanted to watch something together on TV, an offer I accepted with more warmth than I felt, because I understood she was not extending friendship so much as performing normalcy in the hope that I would reciprocate. I was cordial. I was not distant. I gave her no reason to feel that anything was coming. Marcus, meanwhile, was doing what Marcus did when he sensed tension but preferred not to name it. He was overcompensating in small, sweet ways. Extra coffee in the morning. A question about my work project I'd mentioned weeks ago. A text in the middle of the day saying he loved me. I received these gestures with genuine warmth and said nothing. One evening, sitting across from Sienna at the dinner table, I watched her reach for the olive oil. The good one, the Sicilian one, and pour it across her bread with the unstudied ease of someone at home. And I thought, you told a boy that I just married into this house. You said it like it was obvious, like it was something everyone understood. I thought about my father standing in this kitchen. The way he'd look out the back window at the yard he'd planted, that he'd tended, that I'd inherited and maintained and grown into my own. The dogwood tree I'd planted after he died. The kitchen tiles he'd chosen, the ones I'd kept when I renovated because getting rid of them felt like erasing him. I thought about, Dad said it was fine, and I thought, your dad didn't build this. Your dad didn't grieve in this house, didn't heal in this house, didn't plant anything in this ground. Your dad moved into a life that was already here. I didn't say any of it. I passed the breadbasket and asked about her content creation project, and she told me about it for 10 minutes with genuine enthusiasm. And I listened, and I thought, whatever happens next, I am going to be the person who listened. The appointment I made with Patricia for a follow-up was set for January 3rd. Marcus, without knowing it, moved the timeline up himself. On December 28th, he called a family meeting. He announced it the way he announced most things he was nervous about. Casually, with his back half turned while doing something else. In this case, he was making the Keurig coffee I'd bought for him 2 Christmases ago, and he said to the general space of the kitchen, I thought maybe the 3 of us could sit down this weekend, just, clear the air, get everyone on the same page. I was at the table with my pour-over and my work laptop. What page would that be? The house page? He turned around. Sienna's been here a couple of months now, and I can feel I just want everyone to be comfortable. I thought if we talked through some ground rules, that would help. I looked at him. Sure, I said. Let's do that. He looked relieved. He always looked relieved when I agreed to something, a fact that I'd found endearing in the early years of our marriage and now found instructive. Saturday? He said. Saturday's fine. I called Patricia that afternoon. He's setting up a meeting, I told her. On Saturday. He wants to talk about ground rules. Patricia's pause was eloquent. Do you want the formal notice ready by Saturday? I want the full letter, I said. The one that explains my legal position. Not the notice to vacate yet, just the summary. I want to be able to put it on the table if I need to. I'll have it to you by Friday. The letter arrived Thursday afternoon as a PDF to my personal email. I printed 2 copies at the library on Friday morning on my lunch break because I didn't want the print job appearing in the home printer's history before Saturday. I put both copies in a folder and put the folder in my bag. I watered the dogwood tree in the backyard on Friday evening. It was too cold, really, but I needed something to do with my hands. The tree had been bare for weeks, dormant, the way things get in winter that aren't dead, just waiting. Marcus was inside, watching something on TV. Sienna was somewhere upstairs. I stood in the cold in my backyard and looked at the tree and thought about my father, and about the morning in April when I'd put it in the ground, and about how long it had taken me to stop crying when I came out here alone, and about how none of the people inside my house knew any of that story. And I thought, this is mine. The ground under this tree is mine. The air above this ground is mine. And on Saturday, everyone inside is going to know that. I went inside, made tea, slept. Saturday came. What Dad said actually means. Marcus had set the family meeting for 11 in the morning. His instinct for staging, I think. Not too early to feel confrontational, not late enough in the day to be disruptive. He'd put a pot of coffee on and arranged 3 mugs on the counter, a small gesture of normalcy that I found, given everything, almost touching. Sienna came downstairs at 10:50, dressed but not quite awake, and looked at the arrangement with mild suspicion. "This feels formal," she said. "Just a conversation," Marcus said. We sat at the dining room table, the same table where Sienna had moved my chair 2 weeks before, where I'd been having dinner across from her for 2 months, where my father had sat on Sunday afternoons reading his paper. Marcus at the head, Sienna to his left, me to his right. He started the way he started most things, optimistically, with the best possible interpretation of the situation already embedded in his framing. "I think we've all been feeling the adjustment," he said. "Living together takes time, and I know there have been some tensions. I thought it would help to just be clear with each other about what we need going forward and figure out a plan." Sienna nodded. She was looking at the table. "Nora," Marcus said, "do you want to start?" I had thought very carefully about this moment. I had thought about starting with the practical, the ground rules Marcus wanted to discuss, the specific incidents, the car, the guests, the olive oil. I had thought about starting with the emotional, what it had felt like to have this done to me without consent, without consultation. In the end, I started with the folder. I put it on the table, opened it, and set the 2 copies of Patricia's letter in the center, one facing Marcus, one facing Sienna. "Before we talk about ground rules," I said, "I want to make sure we're all working from the same understanding of the situation, because I think there are some facts that haven't been part of the conversation, and they should be." Marcus looked at the letter. Sienna looked at the letter. "What is this?" Marcus said. "It's a summary of my legal position regarding this property," I said, "prepared by my real estate attorney." A silence. "Your attorney?" Marcus said. "Patricia Osei. She handled my father's estate. She handled the title transfer in 2014 when I bought this house." I kept my voice even, conversational, the way you'd explain directions to someone who was lost. "She's confirmed, in writing, that this property is held in my name alone. It was purchased using my personal funds prior to our marriage. It was never refinanced jointly. Marcus, your name is not on the deed, and it has never been on the deed." Sienna looked up from the letter. "Under Georgia property law," I continued, "that means this house is my separate property. It's not a marital asset. It belongs to me the way it belonged to my father before me." I paused. "Which means that when Marcus invited you to move in, Sienna, he wasn't in a position to make that offer. He doesn't have the legal authority to invite someone to live in this property. That authority belongs to me." The room was very quiet. Marcus was reading the letter. I watched his eyes move across it, slowly, the way people read things they don't want to be reading. Sienna said very quietly, "Dad said it was fine." "I know he did," I said. I looked at her directly, and I want to tell you that I tried to hold no cruelty in that look, only clarity. "And I know he meant it. I know your dad would do anything for you. But this isn't Dad's to say." I let that sit for a moment. He can't give away what isn't his. The silence that followed that sentence was a different kind of silence than the one before it. The first silence had been surprise. This one was comprehension. Sienna's face went through several things in rapid succession. I watched her reach for, "Dad said it was fine," one more time, instinctively, the way you reach for a light switch in a room you know well, and find the switch is gone. "So, what does that mean?" she said. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "It means we need to have an honest conversation," I said. "Not about ground rules, about what comes next." Marcus put the letter down. He wasn't angry. I had prepared myself for anger, had rehearsed staying calm through anger, and what I got instead was something harder to handle. He looked like someone who had just been told that the floor was not where they thought it was. "Nora," he said, "why didn't you tell me this before any of this?" "I tried," I said. "The first night Sienna arrived, I said, 'Marcus, this is my house.' You said, 'It's our home.'" He was quiet. "I said it again, a week later, and again, and every time you heard it as a feeling, not a fact. So I got the document. I folded my hands on the table. Because I needed us to be in the same conversation. Sienna pushed back from the table. "Where are you going?" Marcus asked. "I need a minute," she said. She didn't say it with the bravado I was used to, the confidence that came from knowing Dad said it was fine. She said it the way someone says it when they need to not be in a room, quickly, before something that is pressing against the inside of their chest gets out. She went upstairs. We listened to her footsteps on the stairs, the guest room door closing. Marcus and I sat across from each other at my dining room table. "I didn't know," he said. "About the deed, about the separate property thing. I knew the house was yours before we got married, I knew that. But I thought that once we were married, it was just ours, the way everything is ours." "I know you did," I said. I would have asked you if I'd known it was something I needed to ask about." "I believe you," I said. And I did. That was the complicated part. I believed him completely, and it didn't change what had happened. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "I need you to understand the situation first, and I need Sienna to understand it." He nodded slowly. He picked up the letter again and read it more carefully this time, all the way through, not skimming for the devastating parts, but reading the whole thing. When he finished, he set it down and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. "I texted her," he said, "before she moved in. I told her, I said the house was big enough." "I know," I said. "I saw the message." He lowered his hands and looked at me. "You saw it." "On the iPad. By accident. It came up in a notification." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't mean it the way it sounds." "I know," I said. "But that's what you said, and she came here believing you had the authority to say it. And I've spent 2 months being told, by your daughter, that Dad said it was fine. Being treated like someone who had opinions about a house she had no real claim to, when I'm the one with the deed." My voice was steady. I was proud of that. "I need you to understand what that has been like." He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I'm sorry, Nora." 2 words. Simple. Said with a weight that meant he understood, at least partially, what he was apologizing for. "I know," I said. We sat there together in the quiet of the house. My house, his home. Some complicated truth between those two things. And I let the silence be what it was. Sienna was still upstairs. The letter was still on the table. We were not done. But the truth had been said, and the room had held it, and some part of me exhaled for the first time in 2 months. I want to tell you what the next 24 hours looked like, because the story isn't just in the dining room. It's in what happens after the document lands on the table, and everyone goes to their separate corners. Marcus spent that Saturday afternoon in his home office with the door closed. Not hiding exactly, more processing, the way certain people have to go somewhere quiet to metabolize significant information. I have always been like that too, and I appreciated that we shared it. I did not interrupt him. I went to the kitchen and cleaned things that didn't need cleaning, and I called Dana and told her in low, efficient sentences what had happened. And she said "good" so many times that I lost count. "Are you okay?" she asked eventually. "I don't know yet," I said. "Ask me in a week." Sienna did not come downstairs until almost 4 in the afternoon. She came into the kitchen while I was making tea, and she stood in the doorway in the way of someone who wants to say something but hasn't decided what yet. I put a second mug on the counter without being asked. She sat at the kitchen table. I brought both mugs over and sat across from her. And for a long moment, we were just 2 women sitting with tea in a kitchen, which felt, under the circumstances, almost absurdly ordinary. "I didn't know," she said finally, "about the house being yours, like legally yours. Dad never said any of that." "I believe you," I said. And here is the truth that complicated my anger and always had. I did believe her. Sienna was not a person of deep malice. She was a person who had been given the wrong map and then been surprised when the territory didn't match. Her entire sense of her position in this house had been built on "Dad said it was fine," and in her experience, that sentence had always been sufficient. "I'm embarrassed," she said, very quietly into her mug. "Okay," I said. I said some things. A pause. The thing about, you just married into it. I know Brett told you he heard that. I know that's probably why you. She stopped, started again. I was being a brat. I didn't mean it the way it came out. How did you mean it? She looked at me. Her eyes were, I noticed for the first time, a lot like Marcus's. That particular shade of hazel that went greenish in certain lights. She had inherited his way of looking at things she wasn't sure about, a steadiness that was almost stillness. I meant I felt like I was in the way, she said, and I was taking it out on you, which was not okay. I wrapped my hands around my mug. I thought about all the ways I could respond to that. I thought about the lamp on the floor, the olive oil, the Starbucks cup in my cup holder, the gray blanket balled at her feet, the 11 guests until midnight, the boy asleep on my couch. You were in the way, I said, but not in the way you mean. You were in the way of yourself, mostly. You came here with a story about what this place was and what your rights in it were, and that story was wrong. And instead of correcting it, your dad let it run. I looked at her. And I let it run too, because I was trying not to be the villain. She nodded slowly. I need to think about what comes next, I said. And I need you to be a part of that conversation. Not me making a decision and handing it to you. An actual conversation. Can you do that? Yes, she said. Good. I stood up, took my mug. Give me until Monday. I went to the backyard. The light was thin and winter cold, the dogwood bare and patient. I stood by the tree for a long time, long enough to get cold, long enough to feel the particular kind of quiet that follows a significant event. Not peace, not yet, but the stillness on the other side of storm. I knew what Monday would bring. I knew what the formal notice looked like. Patricia had the template ready. I knew what 30 days meant, and 60 days, and I knew what it would mean for Sienna to receive something with a lawyer's letterhead and a deadline. I also knew, standing by the tree my father would never see bloom, that there was a version of this that didn't require a letter. A version where a woman and her stepdaughter sat across a kitchen table and figured out a timeline together, adult to adult, without a judge or a document to force the conversation. The question was whether we'd gotten there, or whether we still needed the document to make it real. Monday would tell me. My house, my terms. I spent Sunday alone, not entirely. Marcus was home, and Sienna was home, and we passed each other in the kitchen and the hallway with the careful courtesy of people sharing a space after something significant has been said. But I spent it alone in the sense that mattered, inside my own head, sitting with a decision I had already made and needed to make peace with before I made it out loud. The decision was this: Sienna needed to leave. Not because I hated her, not because I couldn't imagine a version of our relationship that worked, because the arrangement as it existed had not been agreed to, had been built on a foundation that wasn't real, and had taught all three of us, me, Marcus, and Sienna herself, incorrect things about who had power and over what. And incorrect lessons, left uncorrected, only grow. I had also made a second decision, which was harder. I was going to give Sienna the notice personally, not through Patricia, not through Marcus. I was going to hand it to her myself, and I was going to do it with kindness, because kindness was not weakness, and this situation had already extracted enough of both from me. I was not going to let it take my character too. Monday morning, Marcus went to work. Sienna slept late. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder, and when I heard her footsteps on the stairs at 9:15, I made 2 mugs of coffee. Both pour-over, both mine, both exactly the way I liked them, and set them on the table. She came into the kitchen, saw the mugs, saw the folder, and stopped. "Sit down," I said. "Please." She sat. I pushed one mug toward her. She wrapped her hands around it without drinking. "I've spent the weekend thinking," I said, "and I want to be honest with you about what I've decided and why." "Okay," she said. "I think you need to leave," I said. "Not immediately. I'm giving you 60 days. That's the formal period, and it's also, I think, a genuinely reasonable amount of time to find something, if you're actually looking." I opened the folder and put the notice on the table. This is a formal notice to vacate. My attorney prepared it. It gives you 60 days from today. Sienna looked at the document. She did not reach for it. Her hands stayed around the mug. I waited for Dad said it was fine. I had been waiting for it since Saturday, braced for it the way you brace for weather you've seen the forecast for. It didn't come. 60 days, she said. 60 days. She picked up the notice, read it, put it back down, looked out the window at the backyard, at the bare branches of the dogwood tree, at the winter-gray sky above the fence. I know, she said finally, that I was difficult. Yes. And I know that I said things that were… She stopped. I've been really scared since Devin and I split, and when I'm scared I sort of dig in. I take up more space than I should. I know, I said, because I did know. I had watched her do it. I had watched the bravado perform itself over the fear underneath, the way cheap paint covers a wall that needs more than paint. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Would it have been different if Dad had actually asked you first? I thought about it honestly. Yes, I said. It would have been very different. I might have said yes. I might have said, let's talk about a timeline first. I might have had questions, but I would have been consulted. And that's the thing, Sienna. It's not just that you moved in. It's that I was the last to know. She nodded slowly. She understood. Whatever she lacked in self-awareness about her behavior in the day-to-day, she was not, I realized now, a person who was incapable of understanding a thing when it was put to her plainly. Is there any chance you'd let me stay if I actually paid rent? Like proper rent? And we set actual rules? I had thought about this too. I had thought about it seriously, because I am not a person who gives no to permanence without considering yes. Not right now, I said. Maybe someday, but not right now. We need to reset. I looked at her steadily. And you need to prove to yourself, not me, not your dad, that you can do this without someone else's ceiling. You're 24. You survived a marriage falling apart. That's not nothing, Sienna. But you're using this place to hide from that, and it's not good for you. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she laughed, a short, rueful sound. Are you actually giving me a pep talk while you're evicting me? I'm giving you a notice to vacate, I said. The pep talk is complimentary. She laughed again, and this time it was more real, and I let myself smile, just slightly. She picked up the notice, folded it, put it in the pocket of her hoodie. Okay, she said. 60 days. 60 days, I confirmed. She took her first sip of coffee, made no comment about whether it was bitter. That evening, Marcus came home to find Sienna in her room, on her laptop, looking at apartments, she told him. He came to me in the kitchen, and I saw on his face that she had already told him, and that he had already had a few hours to sit with it. He was not angry. I had been afraid, in the back of the fear I had been carrying since Saturday, that he would be, that the formal notice, the attorney's letterhead, the use of the law against his daughter, would feel to him like a betrayal, a move that said, I care more about this house than I care about this family. Instead, he sat down across from me and said, Can we talk? Yes, I said. What followed was the conversation I think we had needed to have for months. Not about Sienna specifically, not about the deed or the document or the legal technicalities, about the gap between what Marcus had believed about our home and what was actually true, about how that gap had been allowed to exist, by both of us, in the comfortable assumption that what we shared emotionally was the same as what we shared legally, about how he had extended to Sienna a security he didn't have to give, and how that had exposed, in the starkest possible way, a failure of communication that predated Sienna's arrival by years. I should have asked you, he said, not just about Sienna, about all of it, about what this house means to you, about your father. I've been living here for 3 years and I've never asked you what it's like to live in the house where you watched someone die. That one hit me somewhere I hadn't been expecting. I didn't watch him die here, I said. He died in the hospital, but I brought him home once after a bad round of treatment, and he sat in the kitchen and looked out at the yard and he said He said the light in this house was the best light he'd ever lived in. And I think about that every morning when I make my coffee. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry I didn't know that," he said. "I'm sorry I never told you," I said. We sat together in the kitchen for a long time after that. Not fixing everything. Some of it wasn't fixable in one evening, or maybe in 1 year. The question of what our marriage was when the comfortable assumptions were stripped away was not a question one conversation could fully answer. But we began. That was enough for that night. Sienna moved out on a Friday in early February, 51 days after I handed her the notice, 9 days ahead of the deadline, with 2 rolling suitcases and the duffel bag, and without the throw blanket, which she left folded on the guest room bed with a post-it note that said, "Yours, obviously. Sorry it took me a while to figure that out." I put the blanket back in the basket by the fireplace. She had found a studio apartment in Kirkwood, a neighborhood she said she'd always liked, in a building with a rooftop where she was planning to film content. I told her I thought that sounded like a good start. I meant it. Marcus helped her move. He came home that evening quieter than usual, the complicated quiet of a father who has just watched his daughter take a step he knows she needed to take, and understands now why he had been preventing it. "She's going to be okay," I said. "I know," he said. "She's tougher than she looks." "She is," I agreed. "She gets it from somewhere." He almost smiled at that. "I'll count it." The morning after Sienna left, I woke up at 6:15. My usual time, the time that has not changed since I started this job 8 years ago, and came downstairs to my kitchen. It was mine again in the way that felt physical. The quiet was the right shape. The morning light came through the window above the sink the way it always had, the way my father had called the best light he'd ever lived in. And I stood at the counter and took out the pour-over cone and the kettle and the bag of beans from the freezer, and I made my coffee, the way I always have, the only way I know how. Bitter, if you want to call it that. Full, if you're being accurate. I stood in the kitchen of my father's house. My house. The house I'd fought for and grieved in and planted a tree behind. And I drank my coffee in the silence of a Tuesday morning in February, and the light was exactly right. Looking back, I think the hardest part wasn't the notice, or the meeting, or even the months of small violations that preceded them. The hardest part was recognizing that the people who love you can still, with the best intentions, hand away something that was never theirs to give. Marcus loved me. He still loves me. And he gave Sienna the key to my house. Not a physical key, something more dangerous than that. He gave her permission to believe that his belonging made mine negotiable. The deed on my father's house has my name on it. Just mine. I know what that document means now in a way I didn't when I signed it. Because I understand now that documents are only as strong as the people who are willing to hold them. I held it. Not easily, not without cost, not without nearly losing the marriage in the process. But I held it. If you're listening to this and you've ever had someone treat your home like it was theirs because someone else said it was fine, I see you. It is deeply disorienting. It makes you question what is real. But here's what I learned. Real is the name on the paper. Real is the work you did before anyone else arrived. Real is the light coming through the window that you've been watching your whole life. You don't have to be cruel to hold your ground, but you do have to hold it. Have you ever had someone treat your space, your home, your room, your work, like it was theirs to give away? Have you ever been told to just adjust to something you never agreed to? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that patience has a limit, and knowing your rights isn't the same as being heartless. I'll be back next week. Take care of yourselves.